Hi everyone, Stepan here. We're playing Red Perfect 2394. Okay, I had a win in my last game, a loss from a winning position in the game before that, so hopefully I don't mess up a good position if I get one. I also have to try and play quickly because the game I lost because I was in dreadful time trouble. Okay, my opponent's playing the Exchange Slav. This isn't gonna be exciting, most likely. We will see. I usually play these with a6, and that prevents queen b3 after bishop g4 or bishop f5. So if knight f3, bishop g4, if rook c1, bishop f5. Now on queen b3 there's knight a5, queen a4, check b5, and my position is great. Okay, now I usually go rook c8 first, but I can also just take on f3 and play e6. I'll go rook c8 first, and when my opponent castles, I will then take on f3. Exchanging bishop for knight is very common in the Exchange Slav, because this knight usually ends up on c5 after black plays b5, and when you take the knight it cannot end up on c5, and this knight, if white ever plays b4, is going to end up on c4. So this exchange is something I've played multiple times, and the only time I had an uncomfortable position was when white played g4 instead of castling. I had taken on f3 before white castled, and then on e6 white played g4, which is why I have only taken on f3 after white committed their king. So my next move is going to be bishop d6, and I want to challenge that bishop. So we're going to have a position in which I have a knight on f6 for a bishop on f3. Naturally, white's pawn break is e4, but e4 is hard to play because once I take it, the d pawn is hanging. So these positions are imbalanced, but I kind of like them for black. I'm not saying black's better, it should be slightly better for white, but it's harder to find a plan for white, in my opinion. We will see what white does. I mean, rook c1 is a normal move. A3, b4 is kind of standard. Developing the queen, although queen d3 and queen c2 run into knight b4. I don't know. I want to go b5 to prevent knight a4, knight c5. However, that's not as scary without the knight on f3, because my knight on c6 is free to move. I don't have to defend against knight e5. And also, if my opponent plays b4, a3, b4, then knight d7, b6, c4 is a huge square for the knight. And I think it's okay that my opponent's thinking here. It's at this point that you have to find a plan. Queen b3 again, that doesn't work because I go knight a5, and on queen a4 I have b5 with tempo. Okay, that's standard. I'm gonna go bishop d6. If my opponent plays bishop g5, okay, that was exchanged. So now on knight a4, I go knight d7 to prevent knight c5. And well, my opponent hasn't played a3 yet, so b4 cannot really be played. And on queen b3 I still have b5, so that's not really a concern. On e4 I can still take and win the d4 pawn, although I have to be slightly careful about my rook. So e4 takes, knight takes, bishop takes. I don't have queen d4, because at the end of the line rook takes c8 wins two of my rooks. So I have to castle first before I can punish e4. So let's say e4, d4, knight e4, knight e4, bishop e4 castles, queen c2, or even queen h5, g6, and then I take the d pawn. So that seems to work. I'm up 4 minutes on the clock. That has never happened. So my opponent wants to play b4 now. And I feel like b5 is correct before b4 happens to prevent knight a4. So if knight a4, b5, knight c5, then b4 is coming. If b5, b4, then I have the plan I had mentioned before of bringing this knight to c4. So I'm going to play b5. Let's just make sure I'm not hanging anything. b5, knight b5, a b5. No, I'm not hanging anything. So let's go b5. This is playing b5 is always scary until you castle, because this rook isn't defended. Okay, great. This is exactly what I wanted. Now look at the c4 square. This is why you take on f3. This is why you take on f3. So I've actually studied the Exchange Slav a lot because I was struggling against it. And now there is no way to prevent knight c4. There's no way to prevent knight c4. And also my rook's defended, so e4 doesn't work. So once my knight lands on c4, my opponent's going to have to maybe take with the bishop, I don't know. And I'm still up on the clock. And my opponent wishes they could transfer this knight to b3. So a good plan could be knight b1, d2, b3, c5. If I had white, I would seriously consider knight b1. Knight b1, knight d2, knight b3, knight c5. And let's say knight b1, knight d7, knight d2, knight b6, knight b3, knight c4. There is no time for knight c5 because I take on a3. So probably my opponent throws in bishop e2. But then when I play rook e2, I still feel like I have a good position. Okay, my opponent wants to go e4, I guess. Let's bring the knight to b6 and c5. And if my opponent doesn't play e4 now, I'm going to play f5. And then e4 will never be played. Oh, I'm so happy that I'm playing quickly. But I know exactly what I'm doing, because I know the plan. And once I bring my knight to c4, my life's going to be much easier. My opponent's going to be hanging knight d2 all the time. a3 is going to have to be defended. f5 is a threat now. So f5, preventing e4, I like that. I'm going to do that. I'm just not allowing e4. And it's going to take a bunch of time for my opponent to break this position up in any sensible way. a4 fails to knight b4. And if my opponent does nothing, then knight b6, knight c4 with a strategically dominant position. I have over 15 minutes. This has never happened so far in the playlist. Excuse me. The question is, can my opponent prepare f3, e4? That's the question. So bishop e2, knight b6, f3, knight c4. Well, e4 doesn't work yet, because my opponent's going to have to defend the a3 pawn. Okay, the knight's coming to f4. I can see that, but my knight's coming to c4. I think my opponent should have played knight b1. Because on knight f4, I may actually be able to play g5 and g4. I love my position. This is exactly what you want when you play the line with bishop takes f3. And this is my main line repertoire. This is what I play in tournament games. Rook c5 is slightly concerning. However, on knight c4, could I not just play rook e8, knight d7, knight b7 and win that rook? I think so. Then my opponent has a passed pawn on the c file, but I don't think that's too scary. Okay, so now we have to consider g5. g5, if knight e2, then g4 wins the bishop. g5, if knight h3, then g4 wins a piece. g5, if knight h5, g5, knight h5, g4, bishop e2. That knight isn't stranded, it's gonna come back to f4. So I don't think I should commit to g5 just yet. Maybe play rook f6 first, but then my rook isn't defended. So let's play knight c4 first. Do I have to worry about knight e6, queen e6, bishop d5? Not yet. So let's go knight c4. Threatening knight b2, winning an exchange. Queen e2 loses a piece because of g5, g4. Okay. So a4 still doesn't work. I can take on b4, although then e6 is hanging. So let's say I go rook f6, trying to prepare g5. And then on knight h5, I go rook h6, threatening g4, winning the knight. So rook f6. Also rook h6, g5 threatens to take on h2. Yeah, this is very dominant. I love my position. I could already be winning. So when I play rook h6, how does my opponent prevent g5? Oh, I don't think I've ever gotten such a pleasant position against a high-rated opponent. It seems completely one-sided. Again, I could mess this up, and I almost did mess up the last game, even though I was completely winning. And I definitely messed up the one before that, when I had a +5 position with 5 better pieces, and I just hung a piece, and then hung my queen. So, but at least in this game, I'm not in danger of going into time trouble. The only question is, do I go g5 first? Or do I go rook h6 first? Because g5, rook h6, g5, knight h5, rook h6, I'm just threatening. Oh, no, then the knight can come back to g3. Excuse me. So I play rook h6 first. Okay. So if I go rook h6, my opponent goes g3. This knight is coming to c5. The knight's coming to c5. So I'm gonna have to defend the pawn on a6 with a knight move. But should I go rook h6, g3, g5, knight c5, f4? That seems crushing. And then let my opponent take on a6. I don't really care. So rook h6, g3 seems forced, because h3 there's g5, g4. Rook h6, g3, g5, knight c5, f4. Breaking open the position. I love that. I'm gonna do that. Let my opponent take on a6. Let them misplace the knight. Knight e5, of course, fails to knight takes e5, followed by queen takes. Okay, g5, knight c5, f4. g5, knight c5. Yeah, that just seems good. Because on knight a6, I also have knight takes d4. Very scary to move that knight and then defend d4. I understand what my opponent's concern is. So knight c5, f4. If knight a6, I take on g3, fg3. And then rook f8. Maybe even rook h3, bishop h2, rook g3, fg3, queen g3, check. No, sorry. The queen now defends g3 from b3. The thing that concerns me about knight e7, if my opponent goes knight c5, even though it defends the pawn, it allows a4. And I really don't want to allow a4. Although maybe that's not such a big deal. Because when I play f4, my knight's going to have the f5 square. So knight c5, knight e7. Delaying f4 for a move. Or maybe just playing f4. Maybe rook f8. followed by f4. Okay. So my opponent didn't play knight c5. So now I need to reinforce f4. So I'm thinking rook f8. What if my opponent plays f4? Well, if they play f4 now, I have knight takes e3. Okay, so rook f8 works. f4 cannot be played yet. Yeah, if f4 now, knight takes e3. And rook f8 is good for that because I can also move my c6 knight without hanging my c8 rook, which is a lucky coincidence. Oh, I love my position. Okay, my opponent wants to go a4 and break open the position that way. So what happens when I go f4 now? f4, g takes, knight takes, rook takes, e takes, queen takes, h3 seems forced. Is there anything better? f4, g takes. f4, gf4, gf4. Or ef4, f4, ef4. I have knight d4. On a4 I don't have to react, because my a6 pawn still defends, so I have a move to spare. f4. I'm expecting ef4, but then knight d4, and then queen c5, let's say. Then the center opens up. I'm not a big fan of that. f4, ef4, gf4, knight f4. Rook f4, ef4, queen f4, h3. My opponent can defend laterally with the queen. In fact, they don't even have to play h3. They can play queen g3, check. Might be too early for f4. So what about king h8, rook g8, preparing f4? Avoiding the pin and avoiding g takes. Okay, I'm gonna do that. So king h8, a4, rook g8, ab, ab. I don't know what my opponent does next, but I want to go rook g8 and f4 in a position where my opponent cannot take with the g pawn. Okay. Yeah, I probably cannot leave my knight hanging, so let's do that. My opponent still cannot play f4 because I take on e3. Okay, f4. Let's go. Now it works. On g4 I have f3, winning immediately. No, I don't have rook f4 anymore. Idiot. I don't have rook takes f4 anymore. I used my rook twice. Okay, but at least I have knight takes d4. Okay, so I was lucky. I used my rook on the g file and on the f file. Okay, so takes, knight takes. I mean, I have to take. So if I go queen e7, followed by queen h4, how does my opponent defend? Oh, on queen e7 there may be e4. Wait, queen e7, e4, queen h4, attacking the knight, attacking h2. If queen g3, I take the queen. If knight h3, then rook g6. Queen e7, what can my opponent do? Queen e7, threatening queen h4. What if my opponent just plays rook a6, queen h4, rook c6, queen h2, king f1? I don't see a win there. Can I go knight c e5, threatening knight f3? Knight c5, d5, knight e5. Still threatening knight f3. Let's say king h1. I don't see a win there either. Okay, I'm playing queen e7. On rook... oh, did I just hang knight d5? I don't think so. I didn't see it before I played the move, but I don't think I hung knight d5 because it's not with check and I have queen h4. If rook a6, I was gonna say I'm gonna go knight d8. I'm not gonna give up my stuff. I can also take on b4, but I really don't want to take on b4. I may also be able to play knight ce5. Rook a6, knight ce5. But then there is knight takes d5 and bishop takes... No, there's no bishop takes d5 because the bishop is pinned. But because if I take, my rook on h6 is hanging. h3. So queen g5 threatens to play rook takes h3. Because on knight h3, I play queen g2 mate. Okay, let's say my opponent goes king h2. How do I get rid of that knight? Yeah, I'm playing queen g5. It seems like a one-move threat, but... I'm expecting king h2. So rook h3. Do I give up my knight? Rook takes h3. Rook c6. Well, I have rook f3. And how does my opponent prevent rook takes f4? Rook takes h3, rook takes c6, rook f3, threatening to take the knight and then mate. Rook takes h3. Rook takes c6. Rook f3. Threatening rook f4 and queen g2 mate. How does my opponent defend? I don't know, so I'm gonna do it. I don't see a defense. There may be one, but I don't see it. My opponent has to play king f1. And then I take on g2 anyway. Wait, I'm just down the exchange? What? Oh, okay, I have to have something here. Okay, so queen e4 seems reasonable. I have a draw at least. So let's think. Queen e4, king f1 is forced. That's the only move. Okay, let's play queen e4 once. Knight d2 doesn't work. So what can I do? I can take on f4 and threaten knight d2. I don't see anything. Okay, queen takes f4. Let's not go for a draw. I don't want to go for a draw. What does my opponent do? I don't know. Maybe rook e6? Yeah, probably rook e6. Oh, can I go rook a1? Rook a1 threatening knight d2. Rook a1. Oh, rook a8, sorry. Threatening knight d2. I don't know, but I'll try. Does my opponent have queen g3? Maybe. I don't know, I'm getting below 1 minute. There's no rook e1 because of knight d2. Okay, knight d2, rook d2. Knight d2, rook d2, rook a1. King g... No, that's mate. Is that mate? That's mate. Knight d2, that cannot be taken. Knight d2, king... No, I'm stupid. I can play rook g8 check. I can play rook g8 check. What am I doing? Why did I play knight f3 at all? Okay, let's just win the queen. But how? Like this. Like so! With rook g2 mate in the end. Yes! Wait, does it work? So rook g2. Yeah, it works, it works. I have rook g3 winning the queen at least. And winning the rook. Okay, nice, come on. This is one of my favorite games. Yes. Yes, come on, let's go. Okay, finally a win against a high-rated opponent. Excuse me. Whew. Okay. Whew. Okay, a bunch of comments. What? Wow. Okay. So let's see. So this idea of exchanging the bishop is common. You can see that you can play bishop takes f3 immediately, but I wait for white to castle and then I take. Okay, and the engine says slightly better for white. However, you can see that, okay, b4 is definitely a strategic mistake because of the maneuver knight d7, b6, c4 I'd mentioned. Now let's see. Knight d7, knight... Okay, I played f5. f5 isn't correct, but why would I allow e4? I should have gone g5 immediately, but I didn't. I mentioned rook c5, but my opponent didn't play it. g5 straight away, knight h5, knight c4, but I played knight c4 first. Rook f6 is a mistake. g5 was good. But I liked rook f6. Why not? Rook h6, g3, g5. Oh, all of this is slightly better for white. That's very strange. Rook f8 is good. Better for white. Okay. Now rook b1 is the first mistake. Okay, f4 worked. I was afraid of g takes, takes, knight takes, and then king h8. But that's the position I got in the game. What's the difference? Wait a minute. I played king h8, rook g8, takes, takes. Wait, this is better for white? How? +1. Okay, after g takes, it's losing. My opponent should have taken e takes, which which makes a lot of sense. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Yeah. That's what I said. When I played rook g8, I forgot that I thought I had rook f4 in this position. And of course I don't. If I had another rook, rook f4, gf4, queen f4, and then that's the end of the game, because on h3... Oh, I don't even have rook h3 there, because the queen defends. Okay, anyway, my opponent played gf4, knight f4. Queen e7 is a blunder. Knight e7 was good. Why is queen e7 a blunder? h3, queen g5. Yeah, now... Wait, not rook takes h3? Oh, I had rook f4 immediately. Why did I even complicate things? I had rook f6 with the same threat. Indefensible. Okay, but I did this, which is still good. Wait. Okay, not rook h4, sorry. I took on h3. Blunder. How is this a blunder? Oh, rook a8. Okay, I didn't see that. Rook f3, another blunder. Okay, and apparently this isn't completely winning. Okay, it is. It's -1. Okay, rook a8, nice. Okay, knight d2 check. After this, it seemed trivial. Isn't rook d2 mate? How is this given as a move? Yeah, this is mate. Okay, so king here. I shouldn't have played knight f3 at all. That's just stupid. Wait, knight f3 check is a draw after king h1? What? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't. Ah, okay. Don't I have knight e5 check? Yes, I do. Okay. But my opponent played king f1, and now I did play rook g8, which I should have played to start with. And now it seems easy. Yeah. Okay. And then I would have taken the rook, but apparently there's mate here. I would have taken the rook. Okay, mate. Wow. Yes, I finally beat the higher rated opponent. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked the game. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.